If the cameras had turned just 3 feet to the left, the entire country would have remembered a different embrace. Instead, every headline captured Ethan Carter smiling with another woman while his pregnant wife disappeared beneath the glittering lights of the grand ballroom. The applause had not even faded when someone screamed. Crystal glasses stopped clinking. Conversations dissolved into stunned silence. Yet the man everyone admired did not turn around. He tightened his arm around Vanessa Brooks as though nothing behind him deserved his attention. Claire Bennett had always believed heartbreak arrived with shouting, slammed doors, or ugly words whispered behind closed walls. She never imagined it would arrive beneath sparkling chandeliers, surrounded by senators, celebrities, investors, and television cameras broadcasting a charity gala across America. Earlier that evening, she had spent nearly an hour deciding whether she should even attend. Her obstetrician had recommended rest. 8 months pregnant, exhausted, and carrying weeks of emotional strain, she knew the evening would test her limits. But Ethan insisted appearances mattered. Their marriage, he had said, was part of the company's image. Investors expected to see the perfect couple. Claire smiled for photographers because that was what she had done for nearly 6 years. She had smiled through endless business dinners, smiling interviews, and carefully staged magazine covers while quietly wondering when her husband had stopped looking at her with warmth and started looking at her as another obligation. Vanessa entered the ballroom 20 minutes late. She wore confidence better than any designer gown. As Ethan crossed the marble floor to greet her, Claire noticed something strange. His expression changed. The guarded businessman vanished, replaced by a man who seemed genuinely happy for the first time in months. Around them, no one appeared surprised. Executives exchanged quick glances. Board members smiled politely. Even the event coordinator adjusted the seating cards without hesitation, as if everyone had rehearsed this moment except Claire. She suddenly felt like the only guest who had never received the script. The orchestra continued playing soft piano melodies while waiters carried silver trays through the crowd. Claire pressed one hand against her baby as a gentle kick reminded her that she was not standing there alone. She whispered almost silently, "Just a little longer." Then she noticed Vanessa laughing. Ethan leaned closer. Their conversation became a private world inside a room filled with hundreds of people. A photographer called their names. Instead of inviting Claire beside him, Ethan instinctively placed his arm around Vanessa's shoulders. Flash, flash, flash. Every camera captured the embrace. Claire felt the room tilt, though she could not tell whether it came from exhaustion or disbelief. Someone nearby asked whether she was all right. She tried to answer, but the words never reached her lips. The marble floor seemed impossibly far away. Faces blurred together beneath golden lights. Music drifted farther and farther into the distance. As she lost her balance, she caught one final image that would replay inside her mind for weeks. Ethan never looked back. Vanessa rested comfortably against him while another burst of camera flashes illuminated their smiles. Then everything dissolved into darkness. When Claire finally opened her eyes again, the first face she expected to see was not waiting beside her hospital bed. Instead, a sealed envelope rested quietly on the bedside table with only 6 words written across the front. "Everything begins when you remember." The envelope remained untouched for nearly a minute. Claire stared at the neat handwriting while the steady rhythm of the heart monitor filled the quiet hospital room. Every instinct told her to ask where Ethan was. Every emotion she had carried into the ballroom wanted an explanation. Yet something inside her had changed between the polished marble floor and the white ceiling above her hospital bed. She reached for the envelope with careful fingers and slowly opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small flash drive taped to the corner. The note contained only one sentence. Not everyone who watched stayed silent. Before she could read it again, a soft knock interrupted the silence. A woman in her early 60s stepped into the room carrying a bouquet of white lilies. Claire recognized her after a moment. Margaret Hale had worked as the foundation's event coordinator for more than 15 years. They had spoken only a handful of times, yet Margaret's expression carried the weight of someone who had witnessed far more than she wished she had. "I should not stay long," Margaret said quietly. "But there are things you deserve to know." Claire looked toward the hallway. "Did Ethan send you?" Margaret shook her head. "No, he does not even know I am here." She placed the flowers on the windowsill before lowering her voice. The gala ended very differently from what the news is reporting. Claire frowned. Every television headline she had seen on the muted screen described her collapse as a medical emergency caused by exhaustion. The cameras had focused on paramedics, flashing lights, and charity organizers asking for privacy. Nothing mentioned Ethan. Nothing mentioned Vanessa. Nothing mentioned the photographs that had already spread across social media. Margaret hesitated before continuing. There were cameras everywhere, Claire. Not only the television crews. Guests recorded everything on their phones. Security cameras captured every angle. Some people tried to upload the videos before they disappeared. Disappeared? Claire repeated. Margaret nodded slowly. Someone worked very hard overnight to remove them. A chill traveled through Claire despite the warm sunlight entering through the hospital window. Ethan had spent years building a reputation as the perfect entrepreneur, generous donor, and devoted family man. Protecting his public image had become almost as important to him as protecting his business empire. She suddenly wondered how many difficult conversations had been hidden behind carefully managed headlines. Margaret gently pointed toward the flash drive. A young catering assistant copied several files before the servers were cleaned. She did not know whom to trust. She asked me to give this to you. Claire held the tiny device in her hand, as though it carried far more than digital files. Somewhere inside were answers she had not even realized she needed. Before she could ask another question, another visitor arrived. A tall man wearing a navy suit stepped into the room with a leather briefcase in one hand. Mrs. Carter? He asked politely. Claire nodded. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am not here on behalf of your husband. He placed a business card on the bedside table beside the opened envelope. I represent someone who believes the truth deserves a chance before it disappears forever. Claire studied his face, searching for any sign of deception, but found only calm professionalism. Daniel opened his briefcase and removed a sealed folder marked confidential. I am not asking you to make any decisions today, he said. I only ask that you look at what is inside before anyone convinces you that last night was nothing more than an unfortunate accident. Claire rested one hand over her unborn child and slowly drew a deeper breath than she had managed in weeks. Whatever waited inside that folder, she sensed her life was no longer dividing into before and after the gala. It was dividing into before the truth and after it. Claire waited until the room was empty before opening the confidential folder. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the polished floor, turning the crisp white pages into sharp rectangles of light and shadow. On the very first page was a timeline. Dates, meetings, financial transfers, corporate events. None of it looked unusual at first glance. Yet as she continued reading, one detail kept appearing beside nearly every major decision Ethan had made during the past 18 months. Vanessa Brooks. Promotions. Overseas conferences. Private consulting agreements. Executive bonuses approved without board review. Every document suggested a relationship far deeper than simple professional trust. Claire closed the folder for a moment and tried to steady her breathing. She remembered nights when Ethan had returned home long after midnight, blaming demanding investors or emergency negotiations. She remembered birthdays postponed because of sudden business trips. She remembered apologizing to herself for doubting him. The memories no longer fit together the way they once had. A quiet knock broke her thoughts. Daniel Mercer returned carrying a laptop instead of his briefcase. I spoke with the person who secured the files, he said. She agreed to let you see everything. He connected the flash drive and opened a folder containing dozens of videos, photographs, and archived messages. The first recording showed the ballroom moments before Claire entered. Guests mingled beneath crystal chandeliers while musicians rehearsed in the background. Then the camera caught Ethan greeting Vanessa at a private entrance reserved for executive staff. They were already laughing before they reached the ballroom. Another clip showed them standing together while event staff rearranged seating assignments. Ethan personally requested that Vanessa be placed beside him during dinner. Claire had been assigned 3 tables away until another organizer quietly corrected the arrangement. Daniel paused the recording. Watch the timestamp. Exactly 23 minutes before Claire collapsed, Ethan received a phone call. He stepped away from Vanessa, answered briefly, then smiled before returning. Can we hear it? Claire asked. Daniel shook his head. No audio from this camera. But another witness remembered part of the conversation. He opened a typed statement. According to the witness, Ethan had said only one sentence before ending the call. "Do not let tonight become a scandal." Claire stared at the words. They lingered in the silence longer than any accusation. Daniel opened another file. This time, it was a series of deleted text messages recovered from a company-issued device. Most were routine business conversations until Vanessa wrote, "She still believes everything is normal." Ethan's reply arrived 2 minutes later. "Just get through tonight." Claire felt the room grow strangely quiet. Neither message proved an affair. Neither message explained why Ethan had ignored her collapse. Yet together they painted a picture of secrets carefully protected beneath polished smiles. Daniel closed the laptop. "There is something else you should know. Several board members contacted me this morning. They are asking questions because the photographs from the gala spread faster than anyone expected before they were removed. So people saw them." "Thousands did," Daniel answered. "Enough to create doubt. Doubt is often where the truth begins." Claire looked through the hospital window toward the city skyline, where Ethan's company logo crowned the tallest building downtown. For years, she had admired that view, believing it represented everything they had built together. Now it looked different. Strong from a distance, fragile up close. She gently rested both hands over her unborn child and made a quiet promise that no reporter would ever hear and no courtroom would ever record. She would not chase revenge driven by anger. She would uncover every missing piece, every hidden decision, and every carefully buried truth. Somewhere beyond the hospital walls, Ethan Carter still believed he had controlled the story. He had no idea someone else had already started writing the ending. By the following morning, the story had escaped every attempt to contain it. News websites described Claire Bennett as a pregnant philanthropist recovering after a dramatic collapse at one of the city's most prestigious charity galas. Television anchors repeated carefully worded statements released by Carter Holdings, calling the incident an unfortunate medical emergency. The official version sounded polished. Too polished. It explained everything except the one question people kept asking online. Why had Ethan Carter never turned around? Daniel Mercer placed a tablet on Claire's hospital bed. "The public relations team is winning the headlines," he said quietly. "But they're losing the comments." Claire looked down at thousands of messages scrolling beneath the articles. Most of the photographs had been removed, yet screenshots had already spread beyond anyone's control. People had frozen individual frames from the gala. One image showed Claire beginning to lose her balance. Another showed Ethan with his arm around Vanessa, smiling toward the cameras. The timestamps differed by only seconds. No explanation could erase that contrast. "Perception changes faster than facts," Daniel said. "Sometimes the truth only needs a single crack to find daylight." Claire remained silent. She had no interest in becoming the center of a public scandal. She wanted answers, not headlines. Yet someone else clearly feared those answers becoming public. Her phone vibrated for the first time since the gala. Ethan's name appeared on the screen. She stared at it until the call stopped. Seconds later, a text message arrived. "I'm glad you're awake. We need to talk before lawyers make this worse." Claire read it twice before placing the phone face down. Another message followed almost immediately. "The media is twisting everything. Please don't believe strangers over your husband." Daniel noticed the screen, but said nothing. Instead, he opened another document recovered from the flash drive. It contained internal emails exchanged between senior executives only hours after the gala. One subject line immediately caught Claire's attention. "Crisis Response Plan." The email instructed department heads to avoid discussing Vanessa Brooks with reporters, redirect all questions toward Claire's health, and immediately report any employee who shared photographs from the event. Claire slowly looked up. "They prepared this overnight?" Daniel nodded. "Within 3 hours." Before either of them could continue, another visitor entered the room. This time it was Claire's older brother, Ryan Bennett, a former investigative journalist who now worked as an editor for a national newspaper. His expression revealed he had not slept. Without greeting anyone, he placed a printed photograph on the bedside table. It was larger than the versions circulating online. Clearer, sharper. Claire recognized the exact second it had been taken. She was reaching toward a nearby chair for support, while Ethan and Vanessa stood only a few feet away. What she had never noticed before was the reflection in the ballroom mirror behind them. Ethan was looking directly at her. He had seen her collapsing. Ryan folded his arms. Someone anonymously delivered this to my office before sunrise. Silence filled the room. Daniel examined the image before quietly saying, "That changes everything." Claire did not cry. She did not raise her voice. Instead, she studied Ethan's face reflected in the mirror. There was no surprise, no confusion, no frantic movement toward his pregnant wife. Only awareness, followed by a decision not to move. For the first time since waking in the hospital, Claire stopped wondering whether there had been a misunderstanding. The question was no longer what Ethan knew. The question was why he chose to do nothing. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, someone who possessed even more evidence had just taken the first step toward exposing the truth. The hospital discharged Claire Bennett 2 days later under a gray morning sky that matched the silence surrounding her. Reporters waited beyond the front entrance, hoping to capture the first photograph of the woman whose collapse had become the country's newest obsession. She avoided the cameras without saying a single word. Every unanswered question only fueled greater curiosity. Ryan drove while Daniel sat in the passenger seat, reviewing documents that continued arriving from anonymous sources. It no longer felt like a coincidence. Someone inside Ethan Carter's world wanted the truth to survive. As the city drifted past the windows, Claire stared at familiar streets that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Every billboard displaying Carter Holdings reminded her how carefully public success could disguise private failure. When they reached her home, another surprise was waiting. 2 cardboard archive boxes sat neatly beside the front door with no return address. A delivery receipt listed only one instruction: for Claire Bennett. Open alone. Ryan carried the boxes inside, while Daniel checked the property for security cameras. Whoever delivered them knew exactly where Claire lived and exactly when she would return. Inside the first box were company expense reports, executive travel schedules, and handwritten notes clipped together with color-coded tabs. The second box contained something even stranger: personal journals belonging to Olivia Grant, Ethan's former executive assistant. Claire remembered Olivia well. She had resigned unexpectedly almost a year earlier after nearly a decade with the company. Ethan had dismissed her departure as burnout. Claire opened the first journal. The handwriting was neat, precise, and painfully honest. Olivia described months of unusual requests, private meetings hidden from official calendars, payments routed through consulting firms that existed only on paper, last-minute travel arrangements involving Ethan and Vanessa under false project names. Most disturbing of all were several entries describing Ethan's obsession with controlling every public narrative. He says reputation is worth more than truth. One entry read, "If people believe the story, facts no longer matter." Claire closed the journal slowly. Those words echoed through the quiet living room. Daniel carefully examined the remaining folders. "These aren't random records," he said. "Someone organized." Ryan nodded toward a sealed envelope tucked beneath the journals. "There's one more thing." Claire opened it carefully. Inside was a memory card and a handwritten note. Olivia wanted this protected if anything happened to her career. She believed one day someone would need it. Daniel inserted the memory card into his laptop. Several folders appeared instantly. Most contained routine office backups until one file labeled Executive Suite Camera Archive caught his attention. "Executive Suite?" Ryan asked. Daniel nodded. "Internal security footage." They opened the first recording. The date was 6 months before the gala. Ethan and Vanessa entered a restricted conference room after normal business hours. There was no audio, but their body language required none. They were far more than colleagues. The next recording showed Ethan removing documents from a locked cabinet before handing them to Vanessa. She photographed every page before returning them. Daniel paused the video. Corporate records should never leave executive control. Claire remained focused on the screen. She was no longer watching as a wife searching for betrayal. She was watching as someone assembling evidence piece by piece. Then the final recording began. Ethan stood alone inside the executive office, speaking on his phone. Though the camera captured no sound, his reflection in the window clearly revealed for deliberate words formed by his lips. "She knows too much now." Daniel froze the frame. No one in the room spoke for several long seconds. Outside, rain finally began tapping softly against the windows. Claire looked toward the storm without fear. For weeks, she had believed her marriage was collapsing. Now she understood something far larger was falling apart. Somewhere across the city, Ethan Carter still believed he was protecting an empire. He had no idea its foundation had already begun to crack from within. The first sign that Ethan Carter was losing control did not appear on television. It appeared in silence. Phone calls that had always been answered within seconds suddenly went to voicemail. Two board members canceled their weekly strategy meeting without offering an explanation. A longtime investment partner postponed a scheduled conference. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make a man who depended on certainty begin asking uncomfortable questions. Across the city, Claire sat at the dining room table surrounded by neatly organized folders. The evidence no longer looked like isolated incidents. It resembled a map. Every document pointed toward the same destination. Hidden accounts, undisclosed agreements, altered expense reports, executive approvals carrying forged timestamps. Daniel Mercer drew lines across a legal pad until an unmistakable pattern emerged. "This wasn't built overnight," he said quietly. "Someone spent years making sure every questionable decision looked ordinary." Ryan folded another newspaper onto the table. Ethan's smiling face filled the business section beneath the headline. "Carter Holdings announces internal review." Claire almost laughed. Internal review. It sounded responsible, transparent, temporary. But she knew something the reporters did not. Companies only announced internal reviews when they feared someone else was preparing an external investigation. Her phone buzzed again. This time the message came from an unfamiliar number. "Do not trust Vanessa. She is already protecting herself." Seconds later, another file arrived. It contained scanned copies of legal correspondence between Vanessa and a private attorney dated nearly 3 months before the gala. Claire read every page slowly. Vanessa had quietly negotiated financial protection in case her relationship with Ethan became public. Confidentiality clauses, asset provisions, exit strategies. She had never trusted Ethan completely. She had simply expected to benefit before everything collapsed. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Interesting." Claire looked up. "What?" Both of them were preparing for disaster. They just weren't expecting the same disaster. Before anyone could continue, the front doorbell rang. Ryan checked the security camera mounted beside the porch. A nervous young woman stood outside, holding a backpack tightly against her chest. Claire recognized her almost immediately. It was Lily Harper, the catering assistant Margaret had mentioned at the hospital. Lily entered the house with hesitant steps, constantly glancing toward the windows. "I don't have much time," she whispered. "Someone has been following me." Daniel asked no questions. He simply locked the front door. Lily opened her backpack and removed a company-issued tablet wrapped inside a kitchen towel. "They collected everyone's phones after the gala," she explained. "But they forgot this tablet belonged to the catering department. It automatically backed up photographs taken throughout the evening." Daniel connected the device to his laptop. Hundreds of images appeared across the screen. Most showed guests smiling beneath crystal chandeliers, charity speeches, auction tables, musicians performing. Then one photograph stopped everyone. Claire stared at it without breathing. The image had been captured only seconds before she collapsed. Ethan stood facing Vanessa. Yet in the polished surface of a nearby grand piano, his reflection revealed something entirely different. His eyes were fixed on Claire. He saw her clutching her stomach. He saw her struggling to remain standing. He saw everything before anyone else reacted. Lily swallowed hard before speaking again. "There's one more thing." She opened a hidden folder protected by a password. Inside was a short video recorded accidentally while she adjusted the tablet's camera settings backstage. The footage lasted less than 15 seconds. Ethan's voice could be heard clearly for the first time. Calm, controlled, cold. "Ignore the interruption," he said to someone off camera. "The event continues." The room fell completely silent. Claire closed her eyes for only a moment. When she opened them again, the grief that had followed her since the gala was no longer the strongest emotion inside her. It had been replaced by absolute clarity. She finally understood that the greatest evidence against Ethan Carter was never hidden in secret bank accounts or confidential contracts. It was hidden in the choices he made when he believed no one important was watching. He had mistaken compassion for weakness. He had mistaken appearances for truth. And he had just made the one mistake that no amount of wealth could erase. The hearing was never supposed to become public. Carter Holdings had described it as an internal review, a routine meeting between directors and senior executives. No reporters were invited. No cameras were scheduled. Yet by 9 o'clock that morning, every seat in the boardroom felt heavier than usual. Outside the glass walls, employees whispered in quiet clusters, sensing that something irreversible was about to happen. Ethan Carter entered with the confidence that had carried him through countless negotiations. His tailored navy suit was immaculate. His expression remained composed. If anyone noticed the sleeplessness behind his eyes, they said nothing. Vanessa Brooks arrived 5 minutes later. She avoided looking directly at Ethan, choosing a seat near the end of the table instead. It was the first time since the gala that they had been seen together in public, yet they behaved like strangers waiting for separate interviews. Claire did not enter the room until everyone else was seated. She wore a simple cream-colored dress beneath a light coat, her pregnancy impossible to ignore. She carried no dramatic speech, no stack of folders in her hands, and no visible anger. Daniel Mercer walked beside her carrying a single slim briefcase. Ryan remained outside with several attorneys, prepared for whatever happened next. The chairman cleared his throat. This meeting concerns allegations that may affect the integrity of Carter Holdings. Ethan spoke before anyone else could. These accusations are based on stolen documents and manipulated recordings. My family has already suffered enough because of reckless speculation. Claire watched him without interrupting. She remembered that voice. Calm, persuasive. The same voice that had convinced investors, journalists, and even herself for years. But today, every polished sentence sounded rehearsed. Daniel quietly placed the briefcase on the conference table. Before anyone reaches conclusions, he said, "We would like to play one recording that has not been released publicly." Ethan's confidence flickered for the first time. The room lights dimmed as a large monitor illuminated the far wall. Security footage appeared on the screen. The timestamp matched the night of the gala. The executives leaned forward. No one spoke. The video showed Claire beginning to lose her balance exactly as before. Ethan stood only a few feet away. The board members watched his reflection in the polished piano, just as Claire had. They saw him notice her distress. They saw him hesitate. Then the second recording began. It was the backstage video recovered from Lily's tablet. Ethan's voice echoed through the silent room. "Ignore the interruption. The event continues." Nobody moved. Even the air conditioning seemed louder than before. Ethan immediately stood. "That clip is incomplete," he insisted. "You don't know what happened before or after." Daniel nodded calmly. "You're correct." He clicked another file. "Which is why we brought the complete version." The extended recording revealed nearly 2 minutes of uninterrupted footage. Before the event coordinator rushed toward Claire, Ethan remained where he was, discussing media schedules while guests began shouting for medical assistance. Vanessa appeared visibly shaken in the recording, taking a step toward Claire before Ethan quietly caught her wrist and stopped her. The room fell into absolute silence. Vanessa lowered her head. She did not deny what everyone had just seen. One of the independent directors slowly removed his glasses. "Mr. Carter," he asked carefully, "did you knowingly choose not to assist your wife?" Ethan searched the room for support. None came. Another board member pushed a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the hidden financial agreements, executive travel records, and internal emails Daniel had assembled over the past week. The discussion was no longer about one terrible decision at a charity gala. It had become a question of judgment, honesty, and leadership. Claire finally spoke, her voice steady and remarkably soft. "This meeting isn't about ending your career, Ethan. You ended that yourself the moment you decided appearances mattered more than people." No one applauded. No one argued. There was only silence, the kind that follows a truth too obvious to escape. For the first time in his life, Ethan Carter realized that wealth could purchase influence, lawyers, and carefully crafted headlines. But it could never rewrite a choice once the entire room had watched him make it with their own eyes. By sunset, the board's decision had traveled farther than any press release could control. Carter Holdings announced that Ethan Carter had stepped down as chief executive pending independent investigations into corporate governance and ethical conduct. The statement avoided dramatic language, but the financial markets understood exactly what it meant. Within the first hour of trading the following morning, the company's stock fell sharply as investors questioned whether the man who had built the empire had also become its greatest liability. Ethan watched the numbers in silence from his office on the top floor. For years he had believed markets responded only to profit. He was learning that confidence could disappear faster than money. His assistant informed him that 3 major investment firms had suspended negotiations. 2 charitable organizations quietly removed his name from their advisory boards. Invitations to upcoming conferences were withdrawn one after another. No one accused him directly. They simply stopped returning his calls. Across town, Claire refused every interview request placed outside her temporary apartment. Television producers offered exclusive contracts. News magazines promised sympathetic cover stories. Social media commentators transformed her into a national symbol overnight. She declined them all. Daniel asked whether she wanted to make a public statement. Claire shook her head. The evidence has already spoken. I don't need to. That decision surprised everyone. Silence, once again, became stronger than outrage. Meanwhile, another story quietly unfolded inside the offices of Carter Holdings. Vanessa Brooks arrived expecting legal support from the company. Instead, she found her building access card disabled. Human Resources handed her a formal notice placing her on administrative leave while investigators reviewed executive communications and expense records. She sat alone in the empty reception area for nearly an hour before finally accepting that Ethan could no longer protect anyone, not even himself. Later that afternoon, Vanessa requested a private meeting with Daniel Mercer through her attorney. She carried no confidence into the conference room, only exhaustion. I'm not asking for sympathy, she said after a long silence. I'm asking for the chance to tell the truth before someone else tells it for me. Daniel listened without interruption. Vanessa admitted she had entered the relationship believing Ethan would eventually leave his marriage. Instead, she discovered a man who managed every relationship the same way he managed business risks, through control, secrecy, and carefully calculated promises. Whenever a problem appeared, she whispered, he believed he could outlast it. Claire remained calm as she listened. There was no satisfaction in Vanessa's confession, only the quiet realization that deception had consumed everyone who came too close to it. Days later, federal regulators requested access to company financial records after receiving anonymous documentation connected to executive transactions. Independent auditors entered the headquarters carrying sealed cases instead of briefcases. Employees watched from glass corridors as entire filing cabinets were cataloged and removed. The building that once symbolized certainty now echoed with uncertainty. Ethan stood alone in his office as movers carefully packed personal belongings into plain cardboard boxes. Awards lined the shelves. Framed magazine covers celebrated his achievements. Crystal trophies reflected the afternoon light one final time before disappearing beneath layers of protective paper. None of them could defend him. None of them could explain away the choices that had led to this moment. From the window, he looked down at the city he had spent years trying to conquer. The skyline remained unchanged. Traffic continued flowing. People hurried through crosswalks with ordinary concerns. The world had not stopped simply because it had. Several blocks away, Claire walked slowly through a quiet park, one hand resting gently against the life growing inside her. She had not won because Ethan had lost. She had survived because she had chosen truth over fear. Behind her, an empire continued collapsing one decision at a time. Ahead of her, the future remained uncertain, but for the first time in many months, it no longer belonged to someone else. 6 months later, the first cry of Claire Bennett's daughter echoed through the maternity ward just as dawn painted the sky with pale shades of gold. The nurses smiled without recognizing the woman whose face had once filled television screens across the country. To them, she was simply another mother holding her newborn child with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes. Claire welcomed that anonymity. It felt like the greatest gift she had received in years. She named her daughter Grace, believing that some blessings arrived only after everything else had been stripped away. Ryan stood quietly near the window while Daniel waited outside to give the family a few private moments. No reporters knew where she had chosen to give birth. No cameras interrupted the silence. No headlines competed for attention. For the first time since the gala, the world seemed wonderfully small. A week later, the final chapter of Ethan Carter's empire quietly closed. Federal investigators completed their review, resulting in multiple civil actions against several former executives. Carter Holdings survived under new leadership, but the company removed Ethan's name from every building, foundation, and scholarship program associated with its history. His portrait disappeared from the executive hallway. His achievements remained in archived reports, but his legacy no longer occupied the walls. Ethan accepted a settlement that ended years of legal uncertainty, though it could not restore what he had already lost. Friends who once admired him now kept a careful distance. Invitations stopped arriving. Business magazines that had celebrated his success moved on to younger entrepreneurs. Even the luxury penthouse overlooking the city was eventually sold. One rainy afternoon, Ethan visited a quiet neighborhood park while waiting for a meeting with his attorney. Sitting alone on a weathered wooden bench, he noticed a familiar woman walking along the path with a stroller. Claire moved slowly beneath the autumn trees, smiling as Grace reached tiny hands toward the falling leaves. She looked peaceful in a way he had never truly understood during their marriage. Ethan stood instinctively, uncertain whether to approach. Claire noticed him almost immediately. Their eyes met across the narrow path separating two completely different futures. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. There were no accusations left to make, no apologies large enough to change the past. Ethan finally managed a quiet greeting. "She looks beautiful." Claire glanced down at her daughter before meeting his eyes again. "She is." Her voice carried no anger, only certainty. Ethan searched for words that refused to come. Every carefully prepared explanation had become meaningless months earlier. Claire gently adjusted the blanket around Grace and offered a polite nod. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." Then she continued walking. She never looked back. Ethan remained standing beneath the trees until mother and daughter disappeared beyond the curve of the path. For the first time, he understood the true weight of what he had lost. It had never been the company. It had never been the fortune, the headlines, or the influence. Those things could always be rebuilt by someone with enough time and ambition. What could never be recovered was the quiet trust of a woman who had once believed she was safe standing beside him. As evening settled over the city, Claire pushed the stroller toward home while Grace slept peacefully beneath a soft white blanket. The streets ahead were uncertain, but they belonged entirely to her now. She no longer measured success by wealth, recognition, or status. She measured it by the gentle heartbeat resting only inches away from her own. Somewhere behind her, an empire had become a memory. Somewhere ahead, a new life had already begun. Some people spend their lives chasing everything money can buy. Others discover, only after losing it all, that the most valuable things were never for sale in the first place.